I recognize the member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am pleased to be able to add my voice on this issue. We're here debating the Building Billy Bishop Airport Act, proposing to expand the operations at Billy Bishop. And there's a lot of interest in this initiative. I mean, a lot of folks are paying attention to the Premier's luxury jet. That was big news, and then it became a little clearer about why he was so gung-ho to have this expansion downtown Toronto. But it is a lot of interest based in Toronto. Folks are quite unhappy and quite upset, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And I'm going to make a bit of a case for the folks in Oshawa and beyond Toronto who might also be interested in why this downtown airport matters to them. But, Speaker, I'm pleased to be able to stand and rise as the Ontario NDP official opposition Shadow Minister for Infrastructure and Transportation. It's been a very lively file with this government in the last stretch. But here we are, and we're talking about this bill which allows this government to take over the City of Toronto's interests in the Billy Bishop Airport without paying full compensation and blocking all legal recourses. It's another unprecedented land and power grab by this Premier, whose tax-funded obsession with Toronto's waterfront is already costing us billions, and he's neglecting a lot of really important priorities across the province. So what does this bill do? It allows the minister to seize any city-owned land and buildings within Little Norway Park and nearly all of the Toronto Islands, whether or not the land is needed for the airport expansion or not. And because this is not an expropriation per se, what they will do with those islands, to be determined, right? It doesn't have to be for the airport. So I guess stay tuned to see what the real motivations are. It blocks the city from selling or unencumbering any of the above properties, whether or not it is seized. Like I said, it exempts the land grab from the Expropriations Act, so the government can arbitrarily limit compensation, arbitrarily assess undefined costs against the city, prevent the city from challenging the compensation of the land grab. Maybe it sounds like I'm a bit in the weeds, but what we're dealing with is this Premier is seizing nearly all of the Toronto Islands without fair compensation, without a business case, especially as we heard in committee and my colleagues raised, there isn't a business case. The minister said that they're not going to be coming forward with a business case. We can talk about that in a bit. And there's no recourse for the people of Toronto. The government is rewriting the rules so that they cannot be held accountable. This is a Premier who's exempting this land grab from the Expropriation Act, blocking lawsuits, and even in cases of bad faith, and refusing to publish a business case, as I've said. There is no plan, there is no price tag, and there is no federal green light, although I'm looking forward to talking a bit more about the Liberals in this story. Speaker, I imagine that one of the positives that will come from this is that we may find that a lot of Liberals lose their seats in downtown Toronto because it would seem that they are on the side of this government in this endeavour. So we'll delve a bit into that. It's interesting that this is a Premier who is finding billions of dollars for his waterfront obsession while neglecting the rest of the province of Ontario. So this is more money being poured into projects that nobody asked for, but he's not funding, properly funding northern airports, and those are the lifelines of remote communities. If this government is so interested in airports, there are a whole bunch of gravel runways that are begging to be paved. People need to be able to get around. We talk about that a lot in here, but this is just the Premier's downtown Toronto focus. Interesting, this bill, it captures nearly all of the Toronto Islands. Okay, so for the folks who visit Toronto, have been to the Toronto Islands, it's a fantastic destination spot. Spent some time there last summer, borrowed the bikes, tooled around all over the place. It was a lovely day. It will not be in the future when the jets are 2 to 3 minutes apart, where we're breathing this ultrafine particulate matter, which is linked to multi-system diseases. This is not going to be a destination for folks and families, right? But Canlins Point, Centreville, the non-residential parts of Wards Island, Toronto Islands Marina, the Gibraltar Point Centre for the Arts, the Island School, captures all of Little Norway Park, and the recently opened Bathurst Quay Common. It also captures all buildings, structures, and fixtures on these lands, and all interest in these lands, buildings, structures, and fixtures. That's a lot. That's a big grab. This is the kind of thing, Speaker, that people watch and think that it's a downtown Toronto issue. But when we think about the rules, right now there's a tripartite agreement, and that is supposed to be with the Toronto Port Authority, with the City of Toronto, and the federal government. And this bill basically switches the province out for the City of Toronto and just makes themselves a player in the decision-making. I want to share here from the Toronto Star, May 2nd. This is a bit of their breakdown, but I want to talk about the Liberal part of this, because in that tripartite agreement where the province is going to be switching themselves in instead of the City of Toronto, the feds have a role to play. In fact, the federal government and Prime Minister Carney, this is airport stuff. That's federal, okay? So this doesn't happen without their permission and their go-ahead. So as it says here, Liberals could shut down Doug Ford's jet airplane ambitions today if they wanted to. One reason they should be speaking up is that the Ford government is changing the rules of the game. The Liberals are the only player with the power to say stop. The potential rule change is the Building Billy Bishop Airport Act and the Ford government tabled last week that would formalize the takeover of Toronto's role in the agreement, breaking the spirit, if not the law itself, of that agreement. Let's see. Folks have been weighing in on this. Like we've had, all of us, an email sent from a fellow named Harry G. Black, and I have not met Harry, but Harry has spent a lot of time writing to every single MPP in this place. Has put together a very thoughtful, I'll call it an article, but body of work. So I'm going to share some of his thoughts and questions because they're quite interesting. He has said, when we're talking about the actual proposed runway extension, which is going to extend out into the water by nearly 1 kilometre, and that's just not a magical floating carpet. Like, that will be all the way down to the bottom. Okay, this is a lot of earth, a lot of fill that will be trucked into downtown Toronto to build this runway. But he has said it would present engineering difficulties that may in fact make it impossible to build. There are only a few places in the world where a runway has successfully been built over water, that is the depth of the water, around the west side of Billy Bishop. The Ford government has not outlined any details of the proposed extension, but according to an article in the Toronto Star, quoting information from the Toronto Port Authority, it's proposed to lengthen the runway by 900 metres, or almost 3,000 feet, Speaker, out into Lake Ontario on the west side of the island. This is more than twice as far as the original proposal by Porter Airlines. This huge extension would create real problems for marine traffic and recreational boaters going in and out of the harbour through the Western Gap. It would effectively close off the Western Gap. I guess no more water taxis, but anyway. He goes on to say any proposed extension of the runway would need to be not less than 41 feet high from the bottom of the lake at a minimum. Speaker, I don't know if Mr. Black is an engineer and knows that, but perhaps if the government has plans, it'd be really fun to know them. So if that number is off, perhaps they could correct me. But in order to support the structure, it would need to be filled with some sort of backfill, and by his estimates, it would take at least 100,000 dump trucks of backfill to fill the structure. Imagine that in downtown Toronto traffic. And if those numbers are off, share. What numbers you got? Have you done the math on this? I would say, Speaker, that this is an experiment, a very expensive experiment, and my colleagues have thoughtfully talked about the health challenges of that ultrafine particulate that is very damaging. This is not a well-thought-out plan, which brings me to, where does it come from? Who wants this? I mean, obviously a $29 million plane that can't land anywhere, that's no fun. So I feel like the Premier wanted it for that reason. But was it last week or the week before, one of the front bench ministers heckled across to the Liberals that Mark Carney asked us for this. Mark Carney wants this for his jets, is what I heard. So I haven't read that, and I'd love to know, perhaps in the Q&A, if the government can let us know if that is indeed where this has come from. My colleague from Spadina Fort York thinks that it's J.P.Morgan. Yeah, they'll benefit. But who else will? Because if this is for the Prime Minister, I would love for him to be public about it, because our Liberal colleagues, as much fun as it is to sit beside them, I haven't heard anything from them that would make me know that they are opposing this. And Toronto has a lot of Liberals, admittedly. So if something positive comes from this, if this this expansion happens, I hope that the positive that comes is that a lot of those federal Liberals get turfed. Because if they can't stand up for their constituents, get them out of here. The New Democrats would be happy to replace them. Speaker, further to that, here's an article from TVO, and it's entitled, "Why Won't Carney's Liberals Take a Side on Billy Bishop?" Toronto and Queen's Park are feuding over the island airport. The feds are staying on the sidelines. But there's a third partner in the triumvirate that has responsibility for what's happening on Toronto's waterfront, the federal government. What do they have to say about Ford's plans to expand the airport? At the moment, crickets. He goes on to say the federal environment minister is Julie DeBrusen, whose riding Toronto-Danforth is bordered by Lake Ontario. In fact, the airport is right next door. DeBrusen's ministry would be responsible for doing due diligence on a potential airport expansion. After all, there would be environmental factors to consider if the runways were extended and the jet traffic increased. And Greg Sorbera, I remember him because that was my very first protest that I organized. He was having a fundraiser dinner, and I filled the buses to come and protest his dinner. But I'm quoting him, interestingly, at Queen's Park. Greg Sorbera is a former Ontario Liberal finance minister and president of the provincial party, and he told the minister he was, quote, in awe that neither your government nor you as Canada's environment minister nor the Toronto Liberal caucus has expressed even a mild objection to Premier Ford's proposed expropriation of both municipal and federal authority over Billy Bishop. You have a clear line of authority on this matter, end quote. Interestingly, Speaker, the Prime Minister has the right to appoint 7 of the 9 members of the Toronto Port Authority's board, but guess what? 5 of these positions currently remain unfilled. This is interesting. There are a few other people who are staying quiet. This article points out that Ontario's biggest home builders haven't raised a stink, even though they could stand to lose big time. Plans to build new homes on waterfront land would surely be dramatically curtailed if bigger jets were permitted at Billy Bishop. Speaker, there are folks in Oshawa who have reached out and made comments. This constituent, WE, says, it seems to be a very extravagant expense and we should be putting the money to better use, such as in health care. Alexander P. says, if the government is prioritizing luxury air travel while frontline services like education and health care are under strain, the public deserves to see the receipts. Now, this was more specific to the gravy plane, but you know what? Happy to talk about it every opportunity I get. John is a student in Oshawa who shares, students are being told to accept more debt, work harder, struggle more, and somehow be grateful for it. Meanwhile, his government can spend nearly $29 million on a plane for his travel. Students are expected to scrape by, that there always seems to be money when it comes for him, his image, and his priorities. End quote. Speaker, I'm running out of time, which is too bad because there's a Toronto Star article that, I am surprised that it's being as snarky towards the Liberals as it is, but I'll take it. And And it points out, though, if you have time to read it, it points out that the Liberal MPs are in an awkward position. They're surely hearing an earful from their constituents. There are petitions that have garnered signatures in the tens of thousands. But, Speaker, it comes down to this. This is a Premier who has a wish list. He's overplaying his hand. It's a massive land grab. It flies in the face of democracy, which is not a new trick for this Premier. This is not good for anyone's health. It is unnecessary, especially with the expansion of Pearson. We don't need Pearson downtown. The waterfront is a fantastic tourist attraction, and it will no longer be. If you're interested in the mechanics of it, the logistics, the engineering, you won't find it from this government, but perhaps the government members would like to check out the email that was very thoughtfully sent by Mr. Harry Black, who delves into multi-pages of just how challenging it'll be in the downtown core now and going forward. This is a wrong-headed move. Knock it off. Thank you.
Questions? Do we have questions? I'll go to the member from Sudbury.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for speaking with this. My colleague, the member from Spadina, Fort York, he talked about how it's going to cost every household in Ontario $900 for this project. With the unaffordability crisis, with people losing their jobs, with people not having family doctors, not being able to put a roof over their head, not being able to afford groceries, does it make sense for the Premier to have a luxury project to extend a runway into the middle of a lake when we have an international airport at Pearson that is not that far away?
Recognize the member from Spadina, Fort York.
Thank you for the question. Actually, the response that just came is the runway actually goes right beside the spa that they're building. So they're spending $2.2 billion of our tax dollars. That's $400 per household to build a private spa, and then they're going to spend another $5 billion to have jets flying by. So people in the spa won't be able to enjoy it. It's just amazing how this government can waste money. And that $5 billion, that's $900 per household, when we're already expanding Canada's largest airport, Pearson, to handle another 23 million passengers. So it's a complete waste of money. It's completely unnecessary, and it's incredibly destructive to the tourism businesses down on the waterfront that generate 28 million visitors and $20 billion of economic activity. So in this affordability crisis, I don't think anybody in Ontario has said to the Premier or to the Prime Minister, hey, dig into my pocket, take $900 out to expand Billy Bishop.
Questions? I recognize the member from Whitby.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the member from Oshawa. As I understand it, this project is going to support approximately 23,000 construction jobs, generate up to $140 billion economic output over 25 years, increase competition and give travelers more choice and more affordable options. So I want to get some clarity from the member from Oshawa. Does she believe that creating thousands of good-paying jobs and strengthening Ontario's economy is something that they can oppose?
I recognize the member from.
Thank you. Those are interesting numbers, considering there is no business plan, and the Minister of Transportation at committee basically said there's not going to be a business plan. So where's the business plan to even substantiate the question? But I will say that when housing that would have been built along the waterfront is no longer going to be built along the waterfront, what about those jobs? Forget the housing, which this government already has done without my prompting. What about the construction jobs for that housing? How does that compare to whatever numbers he was, I don't know, pulling from somewhere, from the ultrafine particles that are floating around? Speaker, this is something that the people of Ontario deserve: real answers, real numbers, a business case, and this government doesn't have that. When it comes to jobs, we want jobs, but we want real ones in a business case. Thanks.
Questions? I recognize the member from the Bay of Quinte.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. And this question is for the member from Oshawa. And at the end of her presentation, she described this as a luxury project and certainly focused on the expansion in terms of being able to have jets. But we know that this expansion will facilitate all different types of aircraft being used out of Billy Bishop and expand their capacity. And for a lot of communities, like northern communities and Indigenous communities, flight is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And we were actually at FNTI, First Nations Technical Institute in Tyendinaga the other day, announcing $4 million to help train more Indigenous pilots to be able to make those connections to Indigenous communities up north, which could be facilitated out of Billy Bishop. Do you consider that to be a luxury, and why do you think we shouldn't invest in connecting northern communities and First Nations?
I recognize the member from Oshawa.
Thank you. So just to clarify, what I had talked about the luxury, I was quoting a student who was commenting about the luxury jet that the Premier was so excited about. However, I will dig in a little bit more. The luxury piece, if folks are going to be paying to have a good time at the Therma Spa with jets hanging overhead and where they can actually breathe the jet fuel, or the RBC Amphitheatre, the multi-million-dollar revitalization, all of that will be thrown away. So the question, though, he asked about First Nations and northern travel, there are like 19 runways that are gravel that they won't pay. So if they want to talk about travel and airports, there are some that we could point to. Invest in that. So also, let's invest in healthcare so people don't have to travel to Toronto for their healthcare needs. Like, this is a layered problem. Have a layered solution. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Humber River Black Creek.
Thank you, Speaker. Once again, we're debating another big public giveaway to their billionaire banker buddies in the United States, which is something that's common in this chamber. But I just want to be clear. I need to understand this clearly. If this public giveaway goes through, it will only happen if this government and their Conservative Prime Minister buddy in Ottawa reach across, give a big hug, and say, let's go through. He's a Conservative, you know that. All right? Is that true?
I recognize the member from Spadina Fort York.
The Liberals. So, absolutely, this can only happen. Airports are regulated by the federal government. This expansion can only happen if the Prime Minister, the Liberal Prime Minister, gives his go-ahead. That's the only way that this can happen. And the only one that's going to benefit, if you follow the money, the only one who's going to benefit from it is J.P.Morgan, because they've got a bad investment at Billy Bishop. They bought the terminal, and it's not turning out well for them. But if they put in $5 billion taxpayer dollars to expand the airport, then maybe J.P.Morgan can turn that investment around. That's the only one who's going to be the winner here. So it's absolutely a bailout for the Premier and the Prime Minister's billionaire buddies.
Further questions? Further questions? I recognize the member from Humber River Black Creek.
Thank you. I just want to, let's go through a map of downtown Toronto, okay? So we've got an imaginary island, all right? We've got a huge underground tunnel in their imagination. We've got a whole bunch of sand and rocks being piled to build a huge runway leading to a luxury spa that they've yet to build, and we've spent $2 billion on. And at the end of the day, all this money is being made by big foreign interests on the spa from Europe, bankers in the United States. It's just, who's making this up? Tell us, how do you think these plans get drafted up? Because certainly nobody's asking for this except their billionaire friends.
I recognize the member from Spadina Fort York.
I don't think we'll ever know how these plans are getting drafted up, because the Premier is passing legislation to gut the Freedom of Information laws so that he will never have to release his phone records, because he doesn't want to know how he ended up buying a $30 million private jet, or how he ended up giving an Austrian spa a $2.2 billion taxpayer dollar donation subsidy at Ontario Place, and now how they're going to be squandering a $5 billion in order to bail out J.P.Morgan from their investment at Billy Bishop Airport. Unless we can get those phone records, we won't really know how those plans were made.
Recognize the member from Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the member from Spadina, Fort York, Speaker, and I was wondering if the member, I know if this piece of legislation is passed by this Assembly, and we move forward with this expansion as a government, continuing to invest in Ontario and our transportation network, I know the opposition has made it very clear they're going to vote against this piece of legislation. Will the member from Spadina, Fort York, commit to never taking a jet from Billy Bishop Island Airport in the future? Thank you, Speaker.
I recognize the member from Spadina, Fort York.
Absolutely, because the jets will destroy the downtown Toronto waterfront. They will destroy the waterfront. That is the area that I serve. So how could I possibly patronize the service, the jets, the money that's being wasted here, and the destruction of that waterfront? Would you invest money? Would you support a company that came into your community, your riding, and destroyed your riding and made it uninhabitable for people, that reduced the housing cost by 20%, that made it impossible to build more housing that's already been planned? Would you be supporting that company? And I hope, out of loyalty to your residents and your riding, that you wouldn't. And I hope out of loyalty to the people of Ontario that you will not go ahead with this plan, that you actually back off and save the Toronto waterfront and save Ontarians $5 billion.